Welcome everybody to our webinar today. The topic is the war in Ukraine and the future of Central Asia. We are absolutely delighted to have Dosim Satpayev, one of the foremost analysts from Central Asia. Many of you will know of already or will have heard from already on topics such as these and topics regarding domestic politics of Kazakhstan in particular. I want to thank the Center for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies, the Eurasia Initiative, and the Central Asia Lecture Series, of which this discussion is a crucial part. Dosim Satpayev, as many of you will know, heads up the Kazakhstan Risks Assessment Group, as well as, and I'm learning a few things by looking at his materials, the Kazakhstan Council on International Relations. He's a board member. He is an analyst for Forbes.kz. And a co-founder of the Alliance of Analytical Organizations. He's a prominent figure in the think tank and analytic community of Kazakhstan, but also deeply engaged internationally with his counterparts across the globe, from Europe to the United States to now Canada. Dosim is a go-to person for trenchant, precise, and consequential analysis of Kazakhstan, dating back to, I remember when I was doing my my dissertation field research in the 1990s, to a publication that he had from the Institute for the Development of Kazakhstan about about lobbyism in Kazakhstan, the secret levers of authority. And so I've known of Dosim for years, and I feel like we've run in parallel for years, and I continue to learn from him, and that goes for today's webinar as well. I'll turn the floor over to Dosim now, and he'll speak for as long as he feels like. We were thinking maybe about 20 minutes, and then what we'll do is we'll open it up for discussion, for question and answer. You'll see at the bottom of your screen there's a Q&A button. Feel free to drop a question in the Q&A at any moment, and we'll get to it when we get to the Q&A portion of our session today. Dosim Satpayev, welcome to Toronto, sort of. It's bright and sunny here, but we look forward to getting you actually physically here in Toronto at some point in the future. But for today, we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, well, okay. Thank you, Edward, for invitation. Yes, it's very important for me to present for you and for your audience some point of views about the Central Asia region, about the future of our region, about the relationship between Central Asia countries and Russia and another geopolitical player. Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with first very important point of view. Well, I believe that the war in Ukraine for Central Asia region will have the same serious consequences as the collapse of the Soviet Union, which led to the construction of a new system of international relations, a change in the geopolitical balance, the emergence of new risks and threats, and of course, as well as new opportunities for Central Asia region. And when we talk about the future of this region, I believe we have maybe some important challenges. First, we need to build new model of relation with Russia. Well, because the war in Ukraine has made Russia as a toxic partner for the most Central Asia countries. The war in Ukraine has destroyed the myth about the military power of the Russian army and weapons. And this is a rather serious blow to Russia's reputation as a military partner, including within the framework or the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Well, by the way, the most of the members of this organization now in conflict with someone, because Russia attacked Ukraine, Belarus supported Moscow, Armenia, for example, was in conflict with Azerbaijan. Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan now has very big problems around the borders. Well, it means that now this organization, Collective Security Treaty Organization, now has a lot of problems if we talk about the relationship inside of this organization. Of course, Russia will try to keep this organization in two ways. First, by trying to keep its members dependent on the supply of Russian weapons. And secondly, by trying to maintain own military bases in Central Asia region, first of all in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. At the same time, the countries of Central Asia region are not ready to break off relations with Russia. Therefore, at the official level, they will maintain contacts with Moscow, because Russia now still have its own levers of pressure on the countries of Central Asia. For example, if we talk about the Kazakhstan, we should remember that above 80% of our oil export we have through the Russia territory, because we use Caspian Pipeline Consortium. And if you know, last year we had some problems if we talk about the exports of Kazakh oil to the European market, because in the Russia territory appeared very strange accidents connected with this pipeline. But for Kazakhstan, it's very important to use this oil pipeline because we receive a lot of money if we talk about the export of our oil to European market. Well, if we talk about another Central Asia countries, I mean, for example, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, we should remember that a lot of labor migrants from these countries now work in Russia. Yes, well, about, for example, 1 million Tajik people work in Russia. Well, I'd like to say that, for example, as for remittances from Russia, they account for almost 32% of Tajikistan GDP. Since almost 1 million people work in this country, I mean in Russia, and the same situation we can see in Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan. It's very important. But from another side, the most countries of Central Asia will strengthen their multi-vector policy in order to diversify their economic and military political ties. For example, the president of Kazakhstan, Mr. Tokayev, is trying to play a diplomatic game in two directions. He continues to maintain personal contact with Mr. Putin. Well, at the same time, he sends some signal to the West that I am not second Lukashenko and I doesn't support Ukraine. I doesn't support war in Ukraine. Well, it's quite possible that Mr. Tokayev maybe choose the model of behavior of Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Because if you know, Recep Tayyip Erdogan tried to play between Russia, Western countries and Ukraine. Maybe Mr. Tokayev tried to be as one of the mediator between Russia and West. But I'd like to say that inside of Kazakhstan, this diplomatic game didn't receive very strong support from some part of Kazakh society, because a lot of people in Kazakhstan supported Ukraine. Yes, and a lot of people in Kazakhstan believe that for Kazakhstan, more profitable option is the victory of Ukraine in this war. For Kazakhstan, more profitable option, the maximum weakening and heavy damage to the military-industrial complex of Russia, and the weakening of the influence of hawks in the leadership of Russia. Why? Because after 2014, I'd like to say that in Kazakhstan appeared some fears towards to Russia, because if we talk about some separatistic moods in Kazakhstan, and if we talk about some territorial demand that some Russia officials talk about it for a long time, yes, a lot of people in Kazakhstan believe that after Ukraine, Kazakhstan maybe will be the next target for Russia. If we talk about the Russian model of expand Russian world, well, Ukraine, Belarus, and after that Kazakhstan. That's why I'd like to say that now Ukraine is fighting not only for its own territorial integrity, Ukraine also fighting for territorial integrity of Kazakhstan. Well, it's very important. And a lot of people in Kazakhstan know that we should to support Ukraine. Well, but I'd like to say that when in my previous statements, I emphasized that war in Ukraine destroyed the image of Russia as a strong military player. Well, it means that from another hand, after the start of the war in Ukraine, the appearance of some Russia green men in the northern or western part of Kazakhstan and attempt of Russia to implement some Ukrainian scenario in Kazakhstan, I believe will be rather negatively perceived by China and Turkey, because this is country, I believe, will support Kazakhstan in future. Well, it's very interesting that, for example, President of Turkey, Recep Erdogan, he twice he made very interesting statements last year in May, in October, that Turkey will support in Kazakhstan if we talk about our territorial integrity and our territorial sovereignty. Well, it was very interesting signals from Turkey towards to the Russia that you shouldn't to increase some pressure to Kazakhstan if we talk about our sovereignty. Well, but in September, for example, when the head of China, Xi Jinping, visited Kazakhstan, well, it was a very big surprise when Xi Jinping stated that China is ready to strongly support Kazakhstan, is protecting independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. It means that now we have another very important challenge. I mean, building a new geopolitical balance towards to the Russia. Well, and I'd like to say that one of such balances may be a closer military, political, economic, transport, and logistic cooperation between the Turkey, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Hungary in the framework of the organization of Turkey state. Well, at the moment, the total population of all member countries of the organization of Turkey state is more than 170 million people. Well, it's very important for us because in this case, for example, Kazakhstan will have some access to one of the big market for Kazakh goods, for Kazakh finance and capital and investments to another Turkey state countries. The same situation with Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, and Turkey. That's why it's very important for us to increase influence of this organization in different spheres: military, economical sphere, humanitarian sphere, and transport logistics sphere. Well, because, for example, you know that the war in Ukraine led to the disruption of transport and logistic routes through Russia. That's why one of the priorities for Central Asia countries to increase cooperation with Azerbaijan and Turkey if we talk about the development of Trans-Caspian international transport route. Yes, now this is one of the priority route for all Central Asia countries. Well, but I'd like to say this is route also very important for European Union. I mean, linking the transport and logistic program of the European Union Global Gate together with Trans-Caspian international transport route. Well, but moreover, China, after the war in Ukraine, started to use this Trans-Caspian international route as one of the important transit logistic route for China goods. If you talk about the transit through the territory of Kazakhstan. Well, but besides of transport logistic cooperation, I believe that maybe Turkey will be one of the priority partner for Central Asia countries if we talk about the military cooperation. Well, for example, Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan have already actively purchasing some Turkish military drones. Well, it's very interesting situation. But in Kazakhstan, as far as I know, Turkey and Kazakhstan is going to build a factory for the production of Turkish military drones. Well, NAK. Well, it's more powerful drones if you talk in compare with Bayraktar, for example. Well, it means that Turkey for Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and maybe for Kyrgyzstan, it's very interesting partner if we talk about the military cooperation. Well, it's not only connected with war in Ukraine, because, for example, after the war between Azerbaijan and Armenia around the Nagorno-Karabakh, yes, Azerbaijan received very big military assistance from Turkey, and Azerbaijan is very interesting example. If we talk about the modernization of military sphere and a decreased dependence of Russian military complex. And I believe maybe Azerbaijan will be very close military partner for Kazakhstan if we talk about the future. Well, second, geopolitical balance. Yes, of course, we should talk about the China. Traditionally, the sphere of interest of Russia and China in Central Asia region has been tacitly divided for a long time. China actively increased the flow of investments into the region, while Russia tried to play the role of a military political umbrella within the framework of the Collective Security Treaty Organization. At the same time, both Beijing and Moscow actively opposed any attempts by the United States to strengthen its position in Central Asia for a long time. But the protracted war in Ukraine and the ensuing long isolation of Russia sooner or later will lead to its financial, economic, and military political weakening of Russia, which can create a power vacuum in Central Asia region. And China will try to fill this vacuum. Well, Central Asia region is very important for China in 5 areas. First, from the point of view of regional security, because any destabilization of the situation in Central Asia region is extremely unprofitable for China, as China fears that this could provoke destabilization in Xinjiang and maybe led to the activation of some terrorist group in Afghanistan. All this makes it possible for Kazakhstan and other Central Asia countries to use China as one of the geopolitical balance in relations to Russia. Well, who should know that any attempt to encroach on the northern and western region of Kazakhstan will face an extremely negative reaction from Beijing. Secondly, Central Asia for China very important in investment sphere. I'd like to say that, for example, if we talk about the relationship between Kazakhstan and China, for last 15 years, China has invested almost $30 billion in the economy of Kazakhstan. Well, that's why for China, political stability in Kazakhstan is directly related to investment risks. Well, the second very important partner for China in Central Asia region, Tajikistan. Well, and as far as you know, Uzbekistan last time also tried to increase economical partnership with China too. Well, thirdly, another sphere of cooperation between China and Central Asia region, this is transport, logistic, and transit spheres. Because you know that, for example, very important transit route from Western China to Western Europe, this is route passed through the Central Asia region. Another sphere of cooperation between Central Asia and China is this, cooperation in raw materials segment. But it's not only oil, gas, copper, or aluminium. Well, I believe if we talk about the future of Central Asia region, I believe will be some competition between China, European Union, and United States. Competition around the lithium. Yes, this is very important raw material if we talk about the new industry. Electric electric cars, if we talk about the building some factories for producing of accumulators, for green energy. Yes, and I believe lithium, yes, it will be one of the most important raw material. And in Kazakhstan, we have some official figures, maybe 100,000 tons of lithium. It's the same situation in Tajikistan. And I believe this region will be very important for different geopolitical players if we talk about the competition around this raw material resource. Well, another sphere of cooperation between China and Central Asia region, of course, agricultural sphere, because our region important participant in ensuring China's food security. Well, and China last time tried to increase activity in different Central Asia countries in agricultural industry. Well, but you know that, for example, in Kazakhstan and in Kyrgyzstan, we can see some anti-China mood. Well, some anti-China movement. Yes, it's very important too. We should to remember that, yes, of course, from one hand, we should to have some distance from Russia, but we shouldn't to go to the mouth of China's dragon. Yes, that's why we should to have some balance between Russia and China, because China, this is another very ambitious geopolitical player, and we should to remember that for China, Central Asia countries, it's not very important geopolitical play if we talk about international policy. Well, that's why we should to be very careful if we talk about the very close cooperation with China. We should to pay more attention to the national interest of our countries if we talk about the cooperation with China. Well, if we talk about the United States and European Union, yes, for Central Asia countries, this is partner very interesting. And all Central Asia countries last time show desire to increase cooperation. Because, for example, last year in October in Kazakhstan was a very interesting summit, European Union Central Asia. Yes, you know that United States, for example, they have open platform for conversation between the United States and Central Asia countries. But I believe maybe for USA and for European Union, more important partners in Central Asia countries, in Central Asia region will be Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, first of all. Because yes, Kazakhstan, it's very active if you talk about the investment. If we talk about the activity of some biggest United States oil and gas company and European companies in Kazakh economy. But if we talk about Uzbekistan, yes, this is another very important partner for Western countries, because Uzbekistan, it's very important play if we talk about Afghanistan. Yes, because Uzbekistan last time tried to increase activity in Afghanistan. Uzbekistan tries to increase cooperation with movement of Taliban and Pakistan. Yes, and it means that Uzbekistan maybe will be one of the main partners if we talk about the alternative transport route. Because you know maybe that Uzbekistan last time tried to realize Trans-Afghan railway project from Mazar-e Sharif to Pakistan seaport. Well, it's very important alternative transport logistic route, not only for Uzbekistan, but for Kazakhstan too. Well, and another geopolitical balance towards to the Russia, if we talk about the Central Asia region, I believe this is Muslim world. Yes, Muslim world. Because if you look to the all Central Asia countries, you can see increasing of popularity, increasing of influence of religious self-identification, especially young generation in all Central Asia countries. A lot of young people, they move towards to the Islam. Yes, and maybe in next 15, 20 years, the most part of population in Central Asia countries will be more close to Muslim world, not to Eurasia project, not to Western models of development, maybe will be more close to Muslim world. Well, it's very important if we talk about the future of Central Asia countries. Well, Another task, very important task, first of all, for Kazakhstan, if we talk about the future, reducing the risk of secondary sanctions, because Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are important participants in the grain import to Russia. Well, Kazakhstan, for example, has already been included in the United States list of transit countries for sanctioned goods. Besides Kazakhstan, about 16 other countries you can find in this list, because the United States suspects that these countries can be used by Russia and Belarus to evade of United States export control and import sanctioned goods. Well, the United States is concerned that possible relocation of companies from Russia to Kazakhstan and other Central Asia countries to open their production facilities and the possible export of sanctioned products to the Russian market. Well, another task very important for Central Asia countries, we should to decrease any possibilities of military conflict inside of region, because now, for example, we have some tension between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan around the border. Yes, that's why it's very important for us to make some assistance to our partner, I mean Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, to decrease any tension between these two countries. Well, I believe if we talk about the region, we should to be important to be threatened and too important to be lost to all major geopolitical players. And another task, maybe we should make lemonade from lemon. We should to use some windows of opportunities that appear after the war in Ukraine. Well, now I can see maybe 6 windows of opportunities for Central Asia region. First, reduce financial, economic, and military dependence on Russia. Second, accelerate close regional cooperation between Central Asia countries. We should to develop own regional agenda in various areas without the participation of third countries. It's very important for us. Well, third window of opportunity, completion of the process of decolonization, counting on the emergence of a new generation of independence in our country. Another window of opportunity for our region, we can to attract new investors. If we talk about the post-Soviet area, I believe Central Asia region may be now more profitable for some international companies. Now we can see a desire of some biggest transnational company, maybe to open office in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and now we can see some competition between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, if we talk about the attraction of new investors in this country. Well, I'd like to say that now more than 50 international companies have already relocated from Russia to Kazakhstan after the start of the war in Ukraine. Yes, I mean not Russian companies, I mean international companies. Well, I believe it's very good for Kazakhstan. And another very important window of opportunity, we can to attract human capital in some sphere of our economy. IT specialists, for example, engineers, and another very important specialties that we need for development of our economy. And yes, of course, another window of opportunity I mentioned before. I believe Central Asia region maybe will be one of the important transport and logistic hubs in Eurasia. Positioning of Central Asia as one of the reliable regional transport and logistic hubs in the conditions of Russia's falling out of the global system of transport links, I believe maybe it's a very good chance for us to present region as a very interesting player in the global transport logistic cooperation. Now, more than 80% of overland transit traffic along the China-Europe corridor passes through the territory of Kazakhstan. And now we have 4 important transport and logistic routes: Western China, Western Europe, Trans-Afghan route. Now this is only project, but I believe maybe this project will be in next maybe 1-2 years more realistic project if we talk about the desire of Uzbekistan to attract some investors and to receive some security from movement of Taliban in Pakistan. If we talk about this building of this railway route from Mazar-e Sharif to Pakistan. Well, we have another very interesting transport logistic route: Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Iran. Well, and new transport logistic route: China, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. Well, and if this transport logistic route in nearest future will be realized, I believe it will be a very good step for all Central Asia countries to decrease dependence on Russia. Yes. Well, and from another hand, we can too open new market for Central Asia agricultural products, maybe for Central Asia some raw materials, some innovative products if we will produce in future. In this case, I believe that if we talk about the war in Ukraine, yes, we should remember about the risk and threats, but from another hand, we should remember about some opportunities that we have. Okay, I'm finished. Thank you very much for attention. If you have questions, I'll be very glad. I will be very glad to answer it.
Terrific. Thank you, Dosim. This is where normally we would all applaud and you would hear it, but I'll do that on behalf of everyone who's here. You put a lot on the table for discussion, and I think you've set the scene for those in the audience who may not be as familiar with some of the details. But there's a lot certainly to talk about, and those are terrifically insightful comments. Let me start off by let's start off with a few questions that deal with the immediate war and Kazakhstan's position with regard to the war. Not Kazakhstan necessarily as a government, though we can talk about that as well, but the position of ordinary people. Can you say a little bit? I mean, you talked about how Ukraine is fighting in a way for the territorial integrity of Kazakhstan as well. And I can see how it would be, and what you're describing is consistent with what I hear from my colleagues, besides yourself on the ground. That is to say, it's easy to imagine that that Kazakhstan is next, right? The analogy is not hard to make, and so people can probably see their vulnerability with regard to Russia. And although it's obviously not a reliable military partner, it still can, it still can inflict a lot of damage, as we've seen so tragically and dramatically before our eyes. In the West, I can't speak for Europe, but what we tend to see in Canada and the United States is that Ukraine is fighting for democracy, right? So territorial integrity, democracy, related, but they're not the same thing, right? But in the West, it takes upon it's a sort of a moral question, right? It's almost a moral question that there's aside from the tragedy and from the killing, it's how could anyone do this in the year 2022, 2023, right? How is this possible in our so-called civilized world, right? For something like this to happen. And so there's a moral question that is sort of comes to the fore, I would say. And I guess I want to ask that question about the Kazakh public. Do you see any discussions about the moral dimensions of this, or is it purely practical? Like, we don't want to be next, so therefore we must take steps. Is there a moral dimension to the response on the part of people in civil society, across the different? I mean, Kazakhstan there's a lot of variation, right? So I'd love to hear more about how different groups of people react to the war.
Well, Edward, thank you very much for your questions. Well, I'd like to say, about the January events last year in Kazakhstan. Yes, it was a very big surprise for a lot of countries. because for a long time, as official level, Kazakhstan presented as one of the very good example of development, political, economical development. But January events very good showed that Kazakhstan is like I said, paper tiger in all sphere. Yes, in economical development, because now in Kazakhstan, a lot of poor people. For example, well, last year, maybe 2 years ago, I saw KPMG information that in Kazakhstan, around 2 million unemployment people. Well, it's too much for our country because we have population 90 million people. 19 million people. Well, World Bank, for example, yes, they presented another figure that we have about 2 million poor people in Kazakhstan. Well, and if we talk about the, I'd like to say that when I talk about the paper tiger, it means that we have a lot of potential zone of destabilization in different sphere of Kazakhstan. In economical sphere, in political sphere, in military sphere, in information area. Well, maybe now Kazakhstan is like I said, Ukraine 2014. I believe the same situation. Yes. Well, because from one hand, in compare with another Central Asia countries, yes, of course, in Kazakhstan, more active civic society. Yes. We have some protest activity population, we have some opposition leaders, but unfortunately we haven't very strong opposition party. Well, we haven't very strong opposition mass media. Now we can see that a lot of opposition-oriented people move to the social network, to Facebook, for example. And it's very interesting that for example, 2019, when in Kazakhstan was election, after that, Mr. Tokayev, he received the position of president. In 2019, for example, this is part of civic society. They said, we should to have Owen Zelensky. For Kazakhstan, we need to have new formation of politician, as like a Zelensky. It's very interesting. Especially if we talk about the young people, a lot of young people, a lot of young generation that participated in political life in Kazakhstan 2019. Yes, a lot of young people, they said, well, we want to support Kazakh Zelensky, but unfortunately we didn't see some candidates. Yes, it means that the fact of Zelensky, it's very popular in Kazakhstan. If we talk about the political development of our country. Yes, of course, I mentioned about the January events, because after the January events of last year, a lot of people in Kazakhstan, well, not a lot of people, some part of Kazakh population believe, okay, maybe now Mr. Tokayev will try to realize some democratic reform. Maybe he will try to build more pluralistic political system, maybe to build new basis for competition, political competition in different sphere. But unfortunately, we can see that after the January events for last year, Mr. Tokayev is like as a Mr. Putin. Yes, he tried to save authoritarian political system. He tried to present different model to save power in own hand. You know that last year in Kazakhstan, he organized a referendum around the constitution. After that, he organized presidential election without any political competition. You know that in Uzbekistan, the same situation. Shavkat Mirziyoyev, the president of Uzbekistan, in this year is going to organize a referendum around constitution. And in the framework of this referendum, Mr. Shavkat Mirziyoyev, he is going to organize prolongation of his presence as a president in the power of Uzbekistan, in political life of Uzbekistan. It means that Russia and the most part of Central Asia countries, this is authoritarian countries. Maybe for Mr. Tokayev, Putin more closer, if we talk about the political experience, if we talk about the political background. Maybe for Mr. Tokayev, Putin more well-known. if we talk about the political connection, because Mr. Zelensky, for Tokayev and for another authoritarian president, this is white, well, it's not, по-русски белая ворона. Well, no, well, I don't know how in English. Well,
we would say unicorn. We would say a very unusual event, right? Very
unusual. Yes, very unusual. But if we talk about the civic society in Kazakhstan, yes, Ukraine model, very popular. Georgian model, I mean model during the Mikhail Saakashvili reform, very popular. Yes. And now, for example, if we talk about the reform in Kazakhstan, a lot of people try to compare what Mr. Saakashvili, for example, in Georgia, he has made during the 1 and 2 years, and what Mr. Tokayev is going to make if we talk about the political reform. Well, but unfortunately, if we talk about the strong political institutions, strong opposition in Kazakhstan, unfortunately, during the Nazarbayev period, this institution decreased influence, unfortunately. And another very big problems. I can to compare current situation with situation in Kazakhstan in 19th. For example, in 19th, it was very popular idea of very fast democratization. It was very popular pro-Western model of democratization. But now I believe this period have already finished. A lot of people in Kazakhstan, maybe they try to support another model of development. Some people support, for example, religious model of development. Yes, religious model. Yes, it's like it's in Turkey, maybe in Saudi Arabia, in different Muslim countries. And other people in Kazakhstan, they believe maybe for Kazakhstan more important to develop national patriotic model of our political construction. Yes, now in Kazakhstan we have a lot of discussion. What kind of model will be more profitable for us?
So let me ask about that. Just if you take those different groups, you take those who are religious, you take those who are national patriotic, as you say. You also sort of alluded to those who think of Zelensky as a model, so maybe they're liberals or generally oriented that direction. Do they all generally support Ukraine in this war?
Yeah, yes, the most part of it.
Where do you find exceptions to that? Where do you find those who might say, okay, well, they're both wrong, right? Or maybe I support Russia. Are there parts of the population that think that way?
Yeah, well, if we talk about the support of Ukraine, I'd like to remind about a very interesting event last year in March. Well, 6 March last year in Almaty was organized for a big demonstration of support of Ukraine. Yes, it was one of the biggest demonstration in Central Asia region, in Almaty. Well, this is first. Well, second, we should talk about the demographic trends in Kazakhstan, because after the collapse of Soviet Union, before the collapse of Soviet Union, for example, if we talk about the Kazakh population, it was about 40% of Kazakh population living in Kazakhstan before the collapse of Soviet Union. Yes, and after the collapse of Soviet Union, yes, of course, a lot of people belongs to another ethnic groups. But now we can see 70% of population, this is Kazakh people, Kazakh language people. Yes, and I believe now we can see a very objective trend that a lot of people in Kazakhstan try to be more national patriotic oriented. That's why they try to support Ukraine, because this is people believe, okay, Ukraine tried to be more independent. Ukraine tried to save sovereignty and independence from Russia. Well, that's why now we can see, especially if we talk about the young generation, Kazakh language young generation, for example, and another, yes, a lot of young people support Ukraine. Yes, if we talk about the support of Mr. Putin and Russia, well, in previous I mentioned that unfortunately Kazakhstan is like it's in 2014. Unfortunately, Russian propaganda mass media, yes, they have some influence in some part of Kazakhstan population. Yes, of course. Yes, we have some people who very often he listen, Mr. Solovyov, Skabeyeva, another Russian propagandist. Well, yes, of course. Well, and yes, we have some fifth column in Kazakhstan. And well, I'd like to say, when in September, a lot of Russian young people moved to Kazakhstan, when in Russia appeared statement about the military mobilization, yes, in Kazakhstan it was very big discussion about the risks, threats, and about some new problems for Kazakhstan. Now in Kazakhstan we have official figures about 200,000 Russian people in Kazakhstan left after this migration. Yes, well, and nobody know. Okay, some part of these young people, yes, maybe this is people, they are not going to support Mr. Putin, but we don't know what is in the head of these people. We don't know. Yes, that's why it means that maybe in future, if some part of these people will believe in Kazakhstan, maybe will be some problems in intra-ethnic relationship. Maybe will be some problems if we talk about the foreign policy of Kazakhstan. Yes, now we have very big discussion in Kazakhstan. What will happen with Kazakhstan if these people will stay in our country for a long time?
Yeah. Yeah, these are the kinds of changes that they introduce a lot of moving parts. I mean, the situation is very fluid, of course. I mean, you mentioned 2014. I mean, that's a very sort of scary analogy. I mean, if Kazakhstan is in 2014 moment, then it implies a prediction, and the prediction is that Kazakhstan is incredibly vulnerable right now. Vulnerable maybe to territorial, annexation, right? Just following the analogy, but then preparing for worse. But then you also said that Russia's military capabilities, and I think you're right, turn out to be not what we thought they were. They're significantly degraded. The war is very, very expensive for Russia to prosecute. They seem at moments, I mean, I'm no expert in this area, but they seem to be running low on precision weapons. So I hear a different prediction there, which is that Russia is not particularly capable of doing anything militarily to Kazakhstan. So yes. I wonder if you can talk about those two predictions.
Yes, well, yes, of course. Now it's impossible that Russia will try to realize some Ukrainian scenario in Kazakhstan. Yes. Well, why? It's not only connected that Russian military mechanism is not very effective. Well, we have another very interesting point of view. Now, for Russia, Kazakhstan is very important as a territory for gray import. I mentioned before, very important. Yes. Well, I'd like to present some very interesting figures. Well, 2021, for example, Russia imported from Kazakhstan mobile telephone. Well, it's about $36,000, 2021. But last year, from Kazakhstan exported to Russia mobile telephone, $78 million. $78 million. Yes. 2021, $36,000. Last year, $78 million. Well, and if you look to another projects, you can find the same situation. Yes, Kazakhstan for Russia, very important transit territory if we talk about the gray import. This is first. Well, second, in my report, I mentioned that China, for example, very strong disappointed if we talk about the war in Ukraine, because maybe I can believe that in February last year, when Mr. Putin he had meeting with Xi Jinping in China in February before the war in Ukraine. I believe that Mr. Putin he promised that this war will be very fast. This war will be very effective for Russia. It's not problem for China. No, you shouldn't to be. You shouldn't to pay attention to our special operation in Ukraine. But now we can see that this is war establish a lot of negative. Well, established for China very bad consequences. Well, because yes, not only transport logistic, I mean another problems. Well, it means that for China, stability in Central Asia region is very important, because you know that if you talk about the geopolitical priority for China, Taiwan, this is more geopolitical priority for China, not Central Asia region. Yes, for China, Central Asia region, this is задний двор, backyard, yes? Well, yes, that's why for China very important to save stability in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and other countries. Well, it means that, and for Turkey too, I mentioned before that Turkey and China, yes, this is two countries, one of the main partnership for Russia. But from another hand, these countries will be negatively against of any attempt of Russia to realize some aggressive foreign policy towards to Kazakhstan. Yes, that's why now we can see a lot of different factors why now Russia tried to be more careful if we talk about the Kazakhstan. But I'd like to emphasize, if we talk about the information war, media war, I believe Russia will try to increase information pressure to Kazakhstan. Yes, last time we can see a lot of provocation statements, not only for some deputies of Russia parliament, not only from some Russia experts, but for example, Russia ambassador in Kazakhstan recently, he made very provocative statements, yes, about the internal policy in Kazakhstan. Well,
you know, I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, just going back to the 2014 analogy, on the information question, one of the things that happens in Ukraine, I'm not a Ukraine expert, but it seems pretty clear from 2014 is a strong effort to increase media literacy among the general population in Ukraine, so that the general population seemed to be much less susceptible to Russia's media information warfare, right? Which of course preceded the full-scale invasion in February of last year. So question for you on that, and then let's shift to a slightly different topic. Question for you is, are there efforts being made by either civil society groups in Kazakhstan or the government or partnerships of some kind to increase media literacy, the ability of people to resist propagandistic accounts that are really not based in fact?
Well, unfortunately, if we talk about the official position, unfortunately, I didn't see any attempt of our government and president to decrease influence of Russia propaganda mass media. But if we talk about
sorry, let me just interrupt briefly. Yeah, so I'm not thinking about protecting Kazakhstan from propaganda. It will come under the influence of Russian media. Therefore, propaganda, simply will enter into Kazakhstan's information space. It's hard to avoid that. The question is, how do you empower citizens to be able to recognize propaganda, the Solovyovs, and so on, recognize it for what it is, and therefore be able to, say, this is not factual information. I don't believe this. I recognize this as propaganda, because I think there's no way you prevent the information from arriving in the first place.
Well, I'd like to say that now in Kazakhstan we have different we're lucky because now we have some different source of information. If we talk about the war in Ukraine, not only I don't talk about the Ukraine mass media, but a lot of people in Kazakhstan, they see YouTube channels. Ukraine YouTube channels, yes. For example, Mr. Gordon, and another Aristovich. He is very popular figure in Kazakhstan, yes. Well, I mean Kazakh channels, YouTube channels, for example. Yes, we have some very popular YouTube channels in Kazakhstan, very pro-Ukrainian YouTube channels. Well, it's mean, yes, I'd like to say that if you have some alternative, yes, of course, you can to listen this person, and maybe you can to get together different part of pictures. But if you are zombie, it's very difficult. Yes, this is zombie people. They prefer to listen only traditional Russian mass media, yes, in Kazakhstan, in YouTube channels, yes, of course. But for us, for example, more important to work with young generation, to explain what happened, to talk about the geopolitical situation, to talk about importance to support Ukraine, why we should to support Ukraine. Yes, young generation, I believe it's very good basis for future of Kazakhstan. If we talk about the decrease of Russia mass media in our republic, yes. Well, because it's very, it's very difficult to fight with zombie people. It's very difficult. Yes. But for us now, more important, we're not going to fight with these people. No, we should to increase influence around the young people, young generation of Kazakhstan. Yes. Well, I believe it's very important instrument how to organize some changes. If we talk about some information representation.
Yeah.
Well, if we talk about
That's really helpful. I mean, in Canada, one of the sources of information, right, and maybe the best source of information in a way, is Ukrainians themselves, right? So we have connections to Ukraine, historical connections, but we also have, I don't know what the numbers are recently, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians who fled the war and who arrive in Canada, and their stories, their tragedies, their testimonies. It's very real, and it's hard to believe the propaganda when you have a real person in front of you telling you a story that contradicts the propaganda. So I want to ask a question that comes from one of our audience members, and it is: are there Ukrainians at all settling in Kazakhstan as a result of the war? Have some Ukrainians relocated to Kazakhstan? Or are they,
yes,
or is that not happening?
Yes, no, not too much. Yes, if we compare with Russian people, for example. But yes, after the war in Ukraine, some Ukrainian people moved to Kazakhstan if they have some relatives, for example, in Kazakhstan. Yes, well, you know that in Kazakhstan for a long time we have 130 ethnic groups, and Ukrainian ethnic group, one of the active and one of the big in Kazakhstan. Yes, of course. Yeah. Well, Edward, I'd like to say about another very interesting topic when we talk about the self-identification of young people with Ukrainian people, for example. We talk about the history. It's very important because in Ukraine and in Kazakhstan during the Soviet Union was famine, very terrible famine. Well, and that's why if we talk about the some connection between Kazakh and Ukrainian identification, we try to find common roots in Soviet history. And famine, it's very important because, for example, in Kazakhstan, I produced some documentary film about the famine in Kazakhstan. Well, a lot of people has died because they didn't receive foods. Well, in 30 years during the Stalin period, the same situation was in Ukraine. And we published book about it. It's very important, yes, to show for Kazakh audience and for international audience that Ukrainian people and Kazakh people will have the same history. We have the same tragic, we have the same terrible pages of Soviet history. Yes, it's very important. Well,
no, absolutely. You're right. You're right. That parallel between the two historical experiences is pretty dramatic. And you know, in Ukrainian historiography, it's referred to as a genocide. I'm not sure I've seen Kazakh historians refer to it as a genocide, but nonetheless, given the percentage of the population of the Kazakh population being much lower, but the percentage killed who died during the famines is probably higher than it was in Ukraine. In any case, if it deserves that kind of a label in the Ukraine case, it certainly does as well in the Kazakh case. And that would tie these two countries' historical fates absolutely together. It's another question. I mean, we struggle with this in the West as well, to try to get young people to care about the history of 100 years ago. Is sometimes a bit of a challenge, but nonetheless, the war, of course, makes this history quite real, quite relevant to them. Let's shift to sort of the geopolitical scene a little bit, because I think you're probably right that this is kind of a tectonic moment for Central Asia, as it is really for the rest of the world. So why should Central Asia be different? Major changes are afoot, but trying to figure out how those changes will actually unfold is a bit of a challenge. There's a question here about from an audience member about balancing Chinese influence in the region. And I think you're absolutely right that, no matter what happens, no matter how the war ends, right? And I have my own guess as to how the war ends, but there are, of course, various scenarios about how the war ends. China wins, right? China wins. China wins in Central Asia. Probably China wins in general, but nonetheless, certainly with regard to Central Asia. So how do you balance Chinese influence in the region, given that China would not really want increasing US or European influence in the region? Does Turkey really have that kind of power? I mean, it has some, it has historical cultural connections, but it also has this awkward relationship because being part of NATO, it's seen as potentially part of that bloc. So China might be worried about Turkey's deepening relations with Central Asian countries. So what are the options here? And one possibility here is, where does India fit? This is another question in the chat. How does India fit? Can India play some kind of balancing role in this context? Maybe not now, given that it's not really it's trying to play some kind of neutrality card with regard to Russia, but could it play a bigger role in balancing out China?
Well, yes, I mentioned before about the China dragon. Yes, well, we have a geographical destiny. In any case, we have one border with China. Well, we have a lot of investments from China in Kazakhstan and Tajikistan. Well, you know that in Tajikistan, for example, China last time increased military cooperation with Dushanbe. If we talk about the Tajikistan-Afghan border, well, and I believe maybe in future China will try to increase military presence in Central Asia region if Russia will decrease influence in region in future. Well, but Edward, yes, you talk about the China is like as a winner. Well, but yes, but I believe Mr. Erdogan, Turkey, this is another winner of the situation. Yes, because Turkey now tried to attract all transport logistic routes through the Caspian towards to Turkey. Well, now you can see that Erdogan, he has negotiation with Russia to build very big gas hub in Turkey. Yes, and if we talk about some counterbalance towards to China in Central Asia region. Well, in my report, I talk about it. It's organization of Turkey state, organization of Turkey language state. Yes, not only Turkey. I mean, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Turkey. Maybe this is 4 countries. Yes, because, well, you know that, for example, Uzbekistan now he tried to show some distance from Russia. Yes, of course. I mentioned before that a lot of Uzbek people work in Russia, but you maybe you know about the very interesting position of Uzbekistan when Mr. Putin he declared about the establish some gas alliance between Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Russia last year. And after that, Uzbekistan he rejected this project. No, it's not interested for us. No, we're not going to be the member of some gas alliance with you. Well, it means that yes, Uzbekistan tried to increase influence in our region as an independent player. Well, and when we talk about China, we should to use some possibilities maybe to attract China investments to our countries. But we should to remember that for China, we more important only as a raw material resources. Yes, but for our region, more important to make step to upper level of economical development, because for us more important to create here some innovation sphere. Yes, well, because for a long time after the collapse of Soviet Union, unfortunately, Central Asia region, it was some source of raw materials for Europe market, for Russia, for China, for another region of world. But now we should to accelerate regional cooperation. First of all, between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Well, I believe that Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan is like I said, France and Germany in European Union. Maybe this is 2 countries, will be as like as France and Germany in Central Asia region. 2 biggest country with some ambitious, and they have some desire to realize joint economical project, and maybe another Central Asia countries will connect to this project, and maybe it will be very, very good another counterbalance towards to the China. Yes, I mean Central Asia cooperation between Central Asia countries. Well, if we talk about the United States and European Union, well, I'd like to say that if we talk about the Kazakhstan, European Union, the main trade partner for Kazakhstan, not China, not Russia. The main buyer of Kazakh oil, this is European countries. In any case, it means that European Union for us very important. Well, and the same situation with United States, the biggest American oil and gas companies in Kazakhstan. Yes, well, but if you talk about the Kyrgyzstan, for example, and Tajikistan, well, European Union and United States is not very important for these countries. Yes, and for Turkmenistan too. Yes, of course. For Turkmenistan, more important, Russia, China, Iran, for example. But for Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, United States and European Union, very important partner. Yes, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Dosim, you mentioned a report that you did, and I think it might be useful for our audience to have access to that report. Is there a link that you could put in the chat, or you could send to me, and I can get it to
Yes, no problem. I can send you by mail.
Okay, that sounds great. I mean, you started.
Edward, sorry. About the India. Yes, I remember.
India, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, India. Yes. Well, when movement of Taliban received power in August 2021, for example, one of the main loser, it was India. Yes, and one of the main winner, it was China and Pakistan. But now we can see that India tried to increase cooperation with Central Asia region, because last year, for example, it was established some platform for dialogue between India and Central Asia countries. Moreover, last year, for example, it was organized first transport route from India through Pakistan and Afghanistan to Uzbekistan. Yes, it was very interesting example of cooperation, because it was some sugar export from India to Uzbekistan through Pakistan and Afghanistan. It means that India, yes, of course, will try to increase activity, but well, in compare with China and other countries, India, it's too far. It's too far geographically, yes, from Central Asia.
Got it. No, that's very helpful. You started to answer what is my next question, which is, you know, the ability of different Central Asian countries to, let's say, resist or protect themselves, protect their territorial integrity. I mean, Russia would seem to be the most likely threat to territorial integrity given the war. But the ability of different Central Asian countries must be different, right? You know, resource-rich Kazakhstan versus resource-poor Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, just for examples. Also, the vulnerabilities of different countries in Central Asia might be different with regard to Russia, right? Kazakhstan has a long border. It has, you know, historical connections between populations and so on, much less so when you get down to Tajikistan. So can you talk about the variation of different countries with regard to Russia? And does that make it a little easier for Russia, if it chooses to divide and conquer?
Yeah. Yes, you're right. Well, for example, I mentioned in my report about the border conflict between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. It's very interesting that last year, for example, it was some basis of some contradiction between Kyrgyzstan and Russia, for example. Because in Bishkek, they believe, okay, in this conflict, I mean border conflict between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, in this conflict, Putin decided to support Mr. Emomali Rahmon. And after that, Kyrgyzstan decided to stop any military participation of Organization of Collective Security treaty organization. Well, it was very interesting example that some position of Russia towards of some regional conflict will establish some contradiction between these countries towards to Russia. Well, but from another hand, Edward, I'd like to say that for a long time, Russia tried to talk about the threats from Afghanistan towards to Central Asia. Yes, for a long time, Mr. Putin and his circles, they said, well, Afghanistan, it's a very big enemy for Central Asia region. Yes, Taliban, it's one of the big threats. ISIS, Islamic States, and other threats. It means that only Russia will be very good military umbrella for you. Well, but now we can see that, for example, Uzbekistan increased cooperation with movement of Taliban. Well, we can see that Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Kazakhstan, they tried to increase cooperation with Taliban too. Yes, it was very interesting situation that now Russia maybe have lost some instrument of military influence in our region, because a movement of Taliban now one of the partner for some Central Asia countries. But from another hand, yes, I mentioned before that Russia, they have some level of pressure to Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan if you have about the labor migrants. Yes, it's one of the sensitive zone of relationship between these countries and Russia. But well, but I'd like to say that unfortunately, all of our countries, I mean Central Asia countries, this is very weak countries. If we talk about the economical development, security, unfortunately. Well, it means that China, Russia, and other biggest geopolitical player, they have some method of, they have some instrument of pressure to our country. Yes, we're not failed country. We're not failed country, but in any case, we're a very weak player if we talk about the geopolitical global play, well, it means that yes, Russia, in any case, they have some level of pressure towards to our countries in different sphere.
Thank you, Dosim. This is really, I mean, there's so many interesting parts to this, and of course, you know, we've seen what 11 months can do. A lot can change in a short span of time, and certainly has. So who knows what the next 11, 12 months might bring. I want to ask two more questions, and just recognizing that it's quite late there in Almaty. It's I think 10:20 p.m. So I think we've taken a lot of your time. But let me ask two more questions, and you can respond to those two questions and any other final thoughts you might have, and then we'll wrap up our session. I guess I'd like to know a little bit more about. Well, there's a question here in the Q&A about Kazakhstan and the CSTO, but it's a specific question about whether Kazakhstan might join or support Russia in the framework of CSTO in sending troops or some other kind of involvement in CSTO. Could Kazakhstan, or has Kazakhstan been called upon by CSTO, you know, i.e. Russia, because Russia is obviously by leaps and bounds the dominant force in the CSTO. Has Kazakhstan been called upon to contribute via the CSTO to Russia's war in Ukraine? And if not, because my sense is that's not happened, what's the prospect for that actually happening, and what might Kazakhstan's reaction be? So that's the first question for you. Sorry, the CSTO is the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Somebody asks in the chat. So that's the first question. And by the way, footnote, you know, CSTO troops were sent to Kazakhstan in January of last year, as you know, Dosim, right? So Kazakhstan, in a way, you know, has been a recipient of CSTO forces in the past. So you could see how, under normal circumstances, one might expect Kazakhstan to be grateful. These are not normal circumstances. So that's the first question. And I guess the second question, maybe it's related, maybe it's not, is what is happening with military spending in Kazakhstan right now? You mentioned the joint drone factory, which I wasn't aware of with Turkey. So that's one development. But what do we know about the changes that might be happening in, let's say, reform in the Kazakh military, or maybe change in strategy of the military, or maybe change in spending, right? Simple dollars spent on military preparedness in Kazakhstan. And those are my last two questions. And I think, folks, sorry if I didn't get to your questions, but Dosim has stayed up very late for us. So over to you, Dosim, anything you have by way of conclusion.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Well, if we talk about the Collective Security Treaty Organization, yes, it's very difficult position of Kazakhstan. It's very difficult position for Kazakhstan, and especially for Mr. Tokayev. Yes, because everybody know in Kazakhstan and abroad that this organization and Mr. Putin, he helped him in intra-elite conflict in January last year. Yes, it was intra-elite conflict. And now, yes, Tokayev, he is a winner, but he received support from Mr. Putin. And I believe it was one of the main reasons. One, the most part of political and business elite in January of last year decided to support Mr. Tokayev. Because, yes, they saw, oh, Mr. Putin, he supported him. But it means that every time Mr. Putin, and very often Mr. Lukashenko, especially Mr. Lukashenko, especially last year in different summit and conference, Mr. Lukashenko very often remind about it. He talk, well, Mr. Tokayev, you should remember that in January we help you. Well, if we talk about the reputation, well, I'd like to say that desire of Mr. Tokayev invite this organization in January. Yes, it was very big. It was very big negative wave in Kazakh society. Yes, because a lot of people in Kazakhstan believe, well, it means that Russia interfere in internal policy of Kazakhstan. Well, it means that Mr. Tokayev will be more strong connect with Mr. Putin after January events. But the war in Ukraine maybe establish some good chance for Mr. Tokayev decrease influence of this organization. Because after the war in Ukraine, for example, Kazakhstan made some statements. Kazakhstan is not going to participate in some war conflict. If we talk about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, Kazakhstan is not going to support the Collective Security Treaty Organization if Russia will try to use this organization in this war against of Ukraine. Well, and moreover, last year we can see very big problems of this organization. In my report, I mentioned that around the members of this organization, we can see some contradiction. Contradiction between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. Contradiction. Well, you maybe you know that Armenia, for example, yes, Armenia accused this organization that this organization didn't support Armenia in conflict with Azerbaijan. Kyrgyzstan accused this organization that this organization didn't support Kyrgyzstan in conflict with Tajikistan. Well, and I believe that the future of this organization is not very good, and it's very good for Kazakhstan. Maybe Mr. Islam Karimov, the former president of Uzbekistan, yes, maybe he was more smart person, very wisdom person. When 2012, he decided to stop activity of Uzbekistan in this organization, because 2012, Mr. Islam Karimov, he made statements. Well, I believe this organization is not very profitable for Uzbekistan because Russia tried to use this organization for our national interest, but it's not national interest for Uzbekistan. Well, if we talk about the military spend, yes, last year, for example, in Kazakhstan was adopted new military doctrine. Yes, and in the framework of this military doctrine appeared very interesting thesis. For example, that Kazakhstan should to diversify, to organize the diversification, military connection, and military cooperation. Well, yes, of course, in this military doctrine, Kazakhstan didn't mention Russia as, like I said, some threat, of course. But I'd like to say that last year, military spend increase. Yes, maybe it was connected with January events, maybe. And I believe some part of this increasing connected with war in Ukraine. Well, but I'd like to say that if we talk about the Kazakh security, we should talk not only about the military spends, not only about the army and secret services. No, because Ukraine, it's a very good case that one of the main obstacle of any aggression, of any one of the main instrument to decrease threats, it's consolidation between power and society. It's very important. Well, because we can see, if we talk about the first weeks and months of aggression, of Russia aggression towards Ukraine, who was the first obstacle of this aggression? Territoriальная самооборона, territorial self-defense. Yes, but what does it mean? Territorial self-defense, this is local governance. It's very important to emphasize if we should to be insecurity, you should to develop political institution in your country. You should to increase trust of local people towards to the power, to local power and central power. Yes, it's more important, because if you increase only military spends, it's not very real guarantee of your security. Security, this is cooperation between state structures and population, between local and central power. Yes, in different sphere. Yes, security, it's a very good work in information sphere to decrease of influence propaganda, mass media from another countries. Yes, this is a very good background for very good security work, not only connected with military spends. It's my point of view.
Well, I hope that your point of view is heard by those in power. That those in government would do well to not just trot out good ideas for reform, because the Tokayev government has, good ideas on paper for reform, but actually do what Nazarbayev before him didn't do, which is actual reform, including some of the reforms that you're talking about. But one thing I know is that the people both in the West and in Canada and also in across Central Asia are listening to your good ideas and taking them quite seriously, because they're always constructive, they're always well grounded, and we're so glad that you could join us tonight. It's almost 10:30 p.m. in Almaty. And we learned a lot. We didn't get to all the questions, and we didn't get to all the topics. So I think all that means is that we'll have to invite you back to visit us again, either via Zoom or maybe in Toronto in person at some point. Thank you, Dosim. I'm going to applaud on behalf of everybody. And
thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Dosim, I hope to see you sometime in the spring, maybe in Kazakhstan when I come.
Okay, thank you. Welcome to Kazakhstan. Thank you for very interesting questions. Good luck.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks everybody.
Bye.
Everybody have a good day or evening.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye. See you.
Bye-bye.